Hey everybody, Tosan here with a Demon Hunter talent guide. First off, I want to say sorry I didn't upload a video in about a week. I felt really crappy this past week. I think I've been fighting a sickness that's coming on, so hopefully I don't get full-blown flu or something, because that would suck. But anyway, this is going to be a quick guide. Well, I'm going to make it as quick as I can, going over all the talents and the honor talents of Demon Hunter. I'm going to try to explain it thoroughly enough to where you understand the choices, but most of them are pretty straightforward and easy. So, first tier of talents, Fell Mastery is hands down the best. Chaos Cleave is garbage for obvious reasons, in PvP especially, and Blind Fury, although Blind Fury looks tempting because I-Beam can definitely do a lot of damage with this talent, the problem is it's kind of an indirect cost increase to take this, because not only are you spending, the same amount of Fury on I-Beam no matter what, but you're also lacking the Fury generation from Fell Mastery if you take this talent. So it's almost like increasing the cost of your I-Beam to increase the damage, and for an easily interrupted ability, that's just not worth it. Fell Mastery makes your gameplay way smoother by giving you Fury every time you Fell Rush through a target, so it's great. Plus the added damage to Fell Rush is a nice bonus. So that is the clear winner. In this tier, all three of them have merit. Demonic Appetite is nice for solo play when you don't have a healer, because it'll give you those soul fragments that'll not only give you some fury but also heal you, so that's very handy and nice. But lately in Arena I've definitely been leaning a lot more towards Prepared, because the mobility mainly, and the synergy with Momentum, and the synergy with Rushing Vault in the situations you'd want to take it. Just 10 seconds off of a mobility cooldown is so nice for getting around the arena, especially when there's so many slows and kiting tools against things like Frost Mages and whatever, It's just very handy, and Demon Blades has a place. It does have some value for, this is like maximum DPS, sort of, whereas this would be maximum mobility and burst with momentum, but this, I would say, should be reserved for 2v2 with a healer for the most part. So Demon Blades for healer, DPS 2s for the most part, and Prepared should be the default otherwise. You can take Demonic Appetite if you want for solo play. I took it in 1v2s for the extra healing. But Prepared is definitely the go-to for 3v3 in my opinion. Now, on this tier, Bloodlet and Master of the Glaive together are generally the best combo. Now, if for any reason you decide to take Unleashed Power, I'm kind of skipping ahead here for this reason, this is the combo that you would go. Fellblade, Unleashed Power, or Bloodlet, Master of the Glaives. That's the only real change you're going to see in your talents ever. So, Bloodlet hands down wins in raw DPS, especially because it bounces, so it helps you cleave multiple targets, which is a very solid strat against pretty much any comp in 3v3 right now. So, it's a really good combination. Now, Fellblade has its purpose, but I would say Fellblade is only really worth taking either against mages, because they're very hard to catch without it. Sometimes against mages, I'll still take Master of the Glaive and Fellblade, specifically against mages, just because they're so hard to catch. Frost Mages, specifically, are extremely hard to catch. I just want to rule out First Blood, by the way. It's not that good. It's pure physical damage, and it only just doubles the damage. It's just a net DPS loss compared to Bloodlet and Fellblade. So the only time I would ever take this is more of a defensive measure, so you can use Blade Dance more frequently for the sake of dodging, for that 100% dodge for 1 second. If you're getting cleaved or something, it could be useful. But for the most part, Bloodlet and Fellblade are your choices. So, and Fellblade, like I said, I only take if I'm going Unleashed Power, and if I'm fighting Frost Mages most of the time. In this tier of talents, Soul Rending is the go-to, mainly because the added Life Leech from Demon Form helps you keep high pressure, and it makes it harder for them to counter pressure you during Metamorphosis. So, and the other choices, frankly, are just garbage for the most part. Nether Walk, like Blur baseline is too good to give it up for Nether Walk. I can't imagine a situation in Arena where this would be good, or even any PvP situation, honestly. And Desperate Instincts, although this could have value if you're being trained a lot and you want the shorter cooldown on Blur, the problem is activating it on such low health, you can get killed through it if they have a huge amount of damage. So it's very risky. I would only really play this if you end up dying in stun locks and you don't get out of the stun and activate Blur in time. So if you find yourself just dying frequently in stun locks, this could be a nice defensive while stunned that procs every 30 seconds instead of every minute, so that's good. So I would say in only those situations where you're dying in stun locks would this be useful, otherwise Soul Rending. On this tier, Momentum is hands down the best. Fell Eruption is just not good enough to justify a 20% damage increase constantly, and Nemesis limits you to one target for that damage increase, which really sucks. The biggest strength to Demon Hunters, especially in Arena, is when the enemies are stacked up, you can AoE them. Momentum will give you 20% damage period to all the targets that you're hitting, whereas this will only buff it against the one target you're hitting, and This means if you have to swap off that target, which happens a lot, it's going to hurt you because you're going to be doing 20% less damage to everyone else. So I do not recommend Nemesis for anything but like 1v1s or maybe 2v2 where you plan on just training one target start to finish maybe. But even then, I still think Momentum's better. There's a lot of situations where you have to swap, and I hate losing out on that damage. So on this tier, Master of the Glaive is the best, hands down, usually paired with Bloodlet. The only time I've taken Unleashed Power, the only time I'd really recommend Unleashed Power is when you have enough reliable snares on your team that you don't need the Master of the Glaive snare. Now, I was playing with a DK, and because DKs have Chains of Ice, I was going Fellblade, Unleashed Power. And again, Bloodlet is only really better than these other two choices whenever you take Master of the Glaive. So I usually go Fellblade if I'm going to take this. So I took it with the DK because the DK can Chains of Ice and snare people, so I don't really need the snare for Master of the Glaive on paper. Although the DK in particular that I was playing with, for some reason, never likes to use Chains of Ice, or almost never. So it didn't work out as well as I thought, but it should, because, you know, DKs are supposed to Chains of Ice. So if you're playing with a class that can reliably snare targets for you, then you don't really need Master of the Glaive that much. Although, again, it's a good DPS increase. Sometimes in Arena, having that stun come up more often is vital. So what we were doing in DK Demon Hunter is we'd attack, let's say, a Warlock, and then we'd grip his healer on top of us and stun them. And instead of waiting every minute to do that, with this talent, I can do it every 40 seconds, and you get kills with that stun combo a lot. And then every time you do that grip stun combo, you can, you know, Vengeful Retreat to proc Momentum, and then Fury of the Illidari if it's up, and Fell Barrage for a lot of AoE burst damage. So it's a pretty good combo, and having that stun is nice in some situations, but only if you have a reliable slow on your team. Last tier of talents, Fell Barrage is hands down the best. At the beginning of the expansion, Chaos Blades used to be good, but they nerfed our mastery in PvP. Remember, you have a fixed amount of stats in PvP, so we can't control how much mastery we get, and we only have 12 to 13% roughly in PvP, so Chaos Blades loses a lot of value inside PvP instances, so Fell Barrage is hands down the best. Demonic is currently very crappy, but I think it's getting buffed next patch. On to the Honor talents. So for the first tier, this is all situational, and it's honestly kind of hard to explain. I can't really go into detail of all the situations you take them, because honestly, I mostly take Relentless almost all the time. Situations that I take Adaptation are, let's say, for an example, I want to chase a Mistweaver. Some Mistweaver melee cleave comps are very hard for any Demon Hunter comp I'm playing. So a good strategy usually is to split DPS. While my Warrior or DK that I'm playing with attacks their melee, I will chase around the Mistweaver and pressure him. It makes it very difficult for him to heal his whole team, you know, himself and his team. So it's a pretty good strat, in which case I usually take Adaptation specifically to break leg sweep every minute. So he'll paralyze me and I'll have to sit it, and then he'll leg sweep me and it'll insta-trinket, and being a 1 minute trinket helps my uptime against Mistweavers greatly. But generally speaking, I take Relentless for most compositions, just because there's so many little CCs that could hit you at any given time. And then Gladiator's Medallion I almost never use, to be honest. The only time I would say this is good to take is if, let's say, a Windwalker team, they pop all their cooldowns, you know, Touch of Death and Serenity, which I believe are both 2-minute cooldowns, if I'm not mistaken, at least somewhere around there. So if I find I'm fighting a Windwalker team that is consistently killing me inside of stuns and Relentless isn't good enough, then I like to take Gladiator's Medallion. Now you might say, why not Adaptation? Because that's only a minute cooldown, right? But what if they leg sweep me and I instantly trinket? Then they're going to save their cooldowns for the next full stun, and they won't pop Touch of Death and stuff like that. So Gladiator's Medallion gives you the option to bait out those major defensive cooldowns and then trinket and blur or trinket and darkness and whatever to protect yourself. So that's the only time I would really take that. On this tier, I usually default to Reinforced Armor because it's just a general health increase, but it doesn't offer any real mitigation, so it's honestly not that good of a talent. I'd say Hardiness would probably be the better default, and then Sparring you would take against any physical classes that do direct physical melee attacks. I'm 99% sure this does not, because it says physical melee attacks. This shouldn't work on Feral Bleeds or stuff like that, so I would take this against Warriors, Windwalkers, Enhancements, Rets, Rogues that aren't Assassination, and other Demon Hunters, and that's about it. Unless I'm missing something. I think I covered all of them. Frost DKs don't do that much physical damage because of Frost Strike and Howling Blast, so they do very little physical damage. So honestly, it doesn't really matter what you take in that regard here. But those are the situations I would use Sparring against all those heavy physical classes. Now, on this tier, Solitude is great for 2v2 because you're not always going to be, like if you're playing healer DPS 2s, that's really good to have Solitude for the extra damage increase. And in 2v2 with a healer, you don't really need any extra defensives usually. So this will just help increase your output throughout a match. But in 3v3, I almost never take this because your teammates, getting within 15 yards of your teammates happens a lot, especially if you're playing double melee. This is going to be inactive most of the game. I only take Solitude if I do that strat that I told you, where I solo chase around a healer while my teammate attacks the DPS targets across the map, in which case Solitude will have a high uptime, so I usually use it only then in 3s. Darkness is your go-to most of the time because this is an incredible defensive cooldown with this talent. Baseline, it's not that great. 20% chance to mitigate damage, hardly reliable at all. It's a pretty crappy defensive cooldown, but when you make it 70% chance, this becomes one of the best defensives in the game. When the enemy team is popping all their cooldowns, whether it be on you or any of your teammates, you can just drop cover of darkness, and when your teammates stand in it, they're basically invincible unless the enemy team gets some extremely, lucky RNG with that 30% chance. So that's your go-to in 3v3. Glimpse I only take against cleave comps that train me into the dirt. I fought Ret Hunter and Warrior Hunter combinations that train me the whole game, and I end up dying because Demon Hunters are fairly squishy when Blur is on cooldown. So against that comp specifically, I like to take Glimpse, which also has good synergy with Prepared. So every 15 seconds, you'll get 3 seconds of Blur, and that'll make you a lot tankier over the course of a game. So if you know that they're just going to train you, more than likely, that's a really good option. On this tier, it's again totally situational. I usually take reverse magic by default so I can, dispel CCs from my healer from time to time, or dispel roots from myself, especially if I'm playing with a warrior or just another melee. If we get both rooted by a mage right next to each other, I can dispel both of us, and our healer can save his dispel for polymorphs and stuff like that. So reverse magic is a good default go-to. But whenever you're fighting a comp where this is useless, that's when you usually take Eye of Leothorus, which by the way is actually pretty decent on Frost DKs. A lot of their abilities that they use are, spells, so this has a pretty decent uptime. Problem with Eye of Leothorus, though, is it's dispellable, and any good healer is going to instantly dispel it off their teammate. So it's honestly, this tier is usually reverse magic or bust, because it's rare that Unending Hatred and Eye of Leothorus are going to be very useful. Now, Unending Hatred I like to take against Wizard Cleaves a lot of the time if I don't need reverse magic. Something like Ellie Shaman, Warlock, I will actually, well, not necessarily Warlock. Warlock's tough because they don't actually, we usually train Warlocks and they don't cast that many UAs. And unless you're reflecting a bunch of UAs back on the Warlock, it's not that useful. So a lot of the time I'll just take Unending Hatred against these Wizard Cleaves where I don't necessarily need reverse magic. And that'll just give me more Fury generation throughout the game so I can do a little bit more damage. But reverse magic is usually the best choice. On this talent tier, you usually take Awaken the Demon Within most of the time. However, if you're not fearing for your life, if you're fighting a comp that normally trains when you're teammates and you never really die, then Rushing Vault is a really good option. Not only will this increase your mobility, but it will increase your momentum uptime, which will help your damage output. So this is more of a defensive measure. And honestly, a lot of the time, you're being attacked and this procs. Sometimes you have to retreat or you're being like snared and rooted by a Frost Mage or something and you hardly get use out of it. So I usually take this against most cleave comps because if it procs, at least I know they're going to be in melee range and I can, heal myself with the Life Leech talent and also put out a little bit more damage with the bonuses from Demon Form. But for the most part, you'll just default with this and take this if you know you're going to be safe. And then the last tier of talents, totally situational, but Detainment should be your default for most arena matches. I'd say 90% of the time, Detainment is the right choice. Now, you might be thinking, but it's a 4-second CC on a 1-minute cooldown. That's not that good. Timing is everything with this ability. Because we have so limited CC, just time it really well. A lot of the time, you will just burst a DPS target really quickly out of nowhere, and the enemy healer won't be able to react to save him in time, and then you just kind of imprison as a reflex to that burst that you just did. And if you time it really well, it can easily score you kills. Rain from Above, I almost never take in arena. This is more of a defensive cooldown against melee cleaves. Again, if you think you're going to die against melee cleaves, you can take this as a way to fly in the air and immune their attacks while also shooting decent DPS down upon them. But I rarely like to give up Detainment for it, so only if you really need the defensive power of this would I take it. Mana Break is also situational. I mostly take it against Warlocks and Shamans if I think the game is going to last long enough for them to go if you last long enough and the game doesn't end quickly, Shamans are the healer that is most likely to go Mistweavers can go as well. I usually don't take it against other healers. Priests can go but usually their team dies because priests aren't that good. So usually the game ends before they go anyway. But yeah, so I rarely take Mana Break, mainly Locks and Shamans. If I see a Lock Shaman team, I'll typically take it. But that's about it. For the most part, I just use Detainment. So that's it for this video. Hope it didn't drag on too long for you. It's kind of long, so I apologize for that, but I hope it was informative enough to justify the length. And in 7.1.5, which is probably a month or two away, they are going to be drastically changing talents and honor talents for pretty much every class. So I definitely will make an update video as soon as I have all the relevant information to share when the time comes. So expect that. Also, I'm going to be dropping a lot of 3v3 arena down the pipeline, so stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching, and peace out.